the overall kind of objective or objectives of this discussion is for you to consider qualitative methods even though you are in a STEM world. Just like Susan, is it Susan? Yes, Susan just gave me a high five and she said, oh my God, he has a math background and he's going to be talking about qualitative? And so there it is. And, and the other two pieces, one, consider qualitative methods in your projects. Two, culture matters. Three, context matters. Okay? So the three things I want you to take away are for you to consider qualitative research, even though you're around numbers all the time, and for you to know that culture matters, and for you to know that context matters. And I'm going to offer a caveat. I'm going to be very transparent. I'm going to say some things and you're going to go, or you're going to say, he said that? And I mean, it's just, but it's about me, so I get to say it, right? So it's cool. All right. All right, so here's Armin Hervey, right? And some people say good things about my background. So I'm the former chairman of the National Dropout Prevention Center. And give me your name again. Linda. Linda is on the board of the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson. And that is just so cool. So I'm affiliated with Clemson University in that regard, and now I'm a research fellow with Clemson. I'm the National Vice President and Superintendent of Schools for Catapult Learning. So this education business, which is a spinoff of Sylvan Learning, has schools that it manages, 80 of them actually, and they need an academic kind of education-oriented person to manage, monitor, and understand what's going on. I was the Assistant State Superintendent and Deputy Chief State School Officer in the District of Columbia, which believes it's a state. So, yeah, I know. And I've had senior roles in higher education in colleges and universities. So I've been the CEO of a campus, been a provost, I've been the vice president for academic affairs, I've been a vice president for institutional advancement, raising money, I've done everything in between that, and accreditation stuff with Mid-Atlantic and, accreditation with Mid-Atlantic States and Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. Echoing Green Public Service Foundation. Anybody heard of Echoing Green? Oh, yes. Yes. Okay, we'll talk about that. I'm going to put that in the parking lot. And then I was an assistant professor at Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, where I am sort of kind of from. I'm from. All right. So, and we're going to talk about that too. All right. So my doctorate is at Vanderbilt, which Lou alluded to enviously. My Master of Education, I got at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And then I have 2 degrees in mathematics, Master of Science from Clark Atlanta, which is a historically black college, and Bachelor of Science from Edward Waters College. Now, I'm not saying all that to brag, but one of the objectives is context matters. So now I'm going to get into this context piece. My family. Okay, so I'm the darker guy over there in the corner. So I'm the oldest of my mother's 3 children, and I'm using my words correctly, because my mother reared us as a single mother because my father had started 3 other households. Yes, let's do that. How is that? Was that good? Okay, cool. So, I think it was 2 other, we're the 3rd, yeah, something like that. But he had, he was very busy, yes. Busy is a good word. So, my mother was married to my father, and I have a brother 3 weeks older than me, and my youngest brother has a brother 1 year younger than he is, and I think my mother found out that was happening, and we divorced, or she divorced. Okay, so context matters, right? So you have a single mother raising 3 boys, having divorced my father, and she goes to New York, where her older sister is. And I should mention, my mother was the 5th of 14 sharecropping children from the Mississippi Delta. All right, so then she flees to New York. All right, cool. All right, so context matters, right? Context matters. So now the doctorate from Vanderbilt and master's from Harvard and all this, like, how you, okay, so we'll do that. Context matters. My hero. So in New York, that's Mr. Landry. Mr. Landry was the coordinator of the math lab when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. And he said, "You are smart, and I think you can really do this." And he took an interest in this young man who didn't have a father at home, right? And he was a math person, a math coordinator. And then he took me on family trips with his folks and really began to mentor me, and he said I was smart. Also in New York, context matters. In New York, I was, in the 7th or 8th grade, I was cast. Everybody know The Sound of Music, you know, yeah, my favorite things, all that kind of stuff, right? So I was cast in The Sound of Music. Look at me, all right? I was cast as Friedrich, one of the 7 Von Trapp children. And the rest of my brothers and sisters did not look like me. Now, in New York, I didn't know that was an issue. I was like, oh, I'm Friedrich. I'm just doing my thing and everything, you know, all that stuff. And so it's like, oh, okay, cool. But Mr. Landry said, this poor child, he needs to understand that culture and context matters. So I believe he took me under my wing for that. So if you think about that, then my mother moved back to Mississippi. All right? So in New York, she worked 3 jobs, and we were latchkey kids and all that kind of stuff, and we stayed there about 10 years. So I met Mr. Landry. When I moved back to Mississippi, so that's Vera Harrell. She's my 10th grade geometry teacher, 9th grade, something like that. But she's a great, great woman, right? So when I came from New York to Mississippi, I was like automatically smart. That's what they say. I don't remember being really, really smart in New York, but when I came from New York to Mississippi, all of a sudden, I was just like, my teachers were like, who is this? You know, what is going on? And so I just adopted that smart thing. And Miss Harrell, I didn't mind challenging people, so I remember having an error, what she thought was an error, on my paper, and it was like the negative positive thing. So it was a -6, and I think the answer was a +6, or I had a -6 or a +6 or whatever. And I said, Miss Harrell, you know, it's just a sign, you know. I need, you know, where are my points? And you didn't, you know. And she paused and she said, now Herbie, you're smart. And I said, well, and she said, okay, I'll tell you what. She said, if you had a flight at 6 a.m. and you showed up at 6 p.m., what would happen? And I said, I missed the plane. Well, you missed the problem. And from that point, I was like, I want to be just like her. And there's another, so that's my math teacher, Miss Harrell. So, and I have 2 math degrees. So is there any correlation between 2 of my favorite teachers being math folks and me being a math? So yesterday I told you all relationships matter. Okay, okay, great. All right, so now let's get to qualitative stuff. All right, so my Echoing Green Fellowship, excuse me, and for those of you who are not familiar with Echoing Green, it's a public service foundation that funds social entrepreneurs. Oh, it's not coming up. Okay. Hit escape. I'm not in the PowerPoint. Okay, I'll just go back to the PowerPoint. Well, write down Echoing Green. That's cool. No, no, no. Write down Echoing Green. Echoing Green, sir, Echoing Green funds social entrepreneurs, right? Gives them, so when I was at Harvard, I got $50,000 from Echoing Green because they thought I was a social entrepreneur. Or I gave them a proposal for what I wanted to do back in Mississippi with a youth program. So I have up there my counselor. When I came out of high school, I had a 23 on the ACT. I was the president of everything. I was the 5th in my class with a 94 average. I was the drum major. I was all of this stuff. And my counselor said I should focus on brick masonry and carpentry. All right. I had a friend of mine who was similar in, I guess, accomplishments or whatever, and he went to MIT, and he told me the next year that he said the same thing, right? So I had this idea. I was going to take my $50,000 from Echoing Green, go back to Mississippi Delta, and help young people gain awareness, increase their awareness of colleges or top-tier colleges, and gain access to top-tier colleges because my experience was not good. And I went to the college I went to, that's a long story. All of this is long. Okay, so, and I was thinking my youth program would produce highly passionate, skilled leaders that would work in the Mississippi Delta to end poverty. Now, how big of a scope is that? Like, my after-school program could eventually end poverty. Like, how do you measure effectiveness? Right? So I followed a cohort of 35 ninth graders, because ninth grade was where basically college admissions officers began to look at your transcript. So I said, hey, this is ground zero. If you start good here, we can make it. So I started with a cohort of 35 students in the ninth grade, and I tracked them for 4 years. And we had an emphasis on algebra and geometry, of course, which are gatekeeper courses. And since I was a math major, I had to make sure that 100% of them passed, and they did. And our ACT average for the collective group was a 22, which was good, because the national average was a 19.6, and the national average for African Americans, which they all were, was 16.9. All right. And then I had taken them to 60 institutions over the course of 4 years. Every spring break, we got on a bus and we went to 60 institutions, and we covered the gamut of profiles of colleges. And so they had been to Harvard and Dartmouth. One time I was a public speaker at the MLK speaker at Dartmouth one year. We went to Rice, Fisk, Spelman. We showed them all kinds of colleges, right? Lots of tutoring, lots of mentoring. And at the end of the 4 years, those students followed the same trend, going to the same college and or colleges as if I had not been there. The same data that I looked at to create the program, and I said, you know what, all they need to know is that these other colleges exist, and I need to take them there, and I did, and I spent my time, and I did workshops in the basement of churches, and I did parent meetings, and I did all of this stuff. And I mentored, and I talked to the kids, and I did the pregnancy test, but it didn't happen. I got all of those calls. I got all of those calls. Yes. Did I? 9th grade to 12th grade, right? Okay, right. So I did all of it. Got all of those calls to have at the end of that, it looked like nothing changed. Imagine spending 4 years of your life, of your young adult life, right? You know, and nothing, and not feeling like you had an impact. So then I get to Vanderbilt, and I'm trying to finish my doctorate, and I was ABD for 4 years. I did the coursework in a year and a half, and I was ABD for 4 years. I could not get that thing started. And so my chair said, you need to think about some problem that perplexes you. I said, okay. So I have played the piano and Yale car. So play the piano. After 4 years of working with one particular student, he has a scholarship to Clark Atlanta, or Morehouse, one of them, and he comes crying to me, Ermin, Daddy won't let me go. I'm like, but we filled out the application at your kitchen table. Everybody knows you wanted to go. I go talk to the daddy for about 2 hours. At the end of an hour and 58 minutes, he's flustered and he says, oh, by the way, he's a reverend with 7 kids, and this was the oldest of the 7 kids. Context matters, culture matters. He said, if I let him go, who's going to play the piano at my church? Exactly. I was sitting there like, Harvard or Vanderbilt did not prepare me for this, right? I just said, how do you do it? It's like, how do you deal with that, right? And then the Yale in the car, I had a student admitted to Yale, right? And they live deep in the country in Chula. You know where Chula is, Ernest? Okay. Imagine a town called Chula. You know how small that is, right? So we walked to Chula, and he said, his father said he didn't want him to go, and, the son wanted to go, and his father said, if you stay, I'll give you a car. And I'm like, what? So that's what I'm competing against. So the perplexing issue for me was, what is going on here? I've given 4 years of my life, I've done this, I've done that, and they still didn't, All right, so that question could not be answered with quantitative data. So it took all that time to get here, right? So that's right. So me, with 2 degrees in mathematics and understanding STEM and all of that kind of stuff, invested my life in a program that I didn't think was effective. I had to understand the underlying layers of all that stuff. So it's not, all right, so we're not really going to talk about that. I just wanted to let you know what brought me to qualitative research. Okay, so here's a slide on the difference between research and evaluation. And Lou, you had mentioned something about that and wanting to know the difference. And so on the research side, you seek qualitative. So you seek to generate new knowledge. It's researcher focused, and there's a hypothesis or a guess, right? And you have methods, all right? And you make recommendations, make research recommendations, you publish the results. On the evaluation side, is information for decision making, right? You want to know what works, what doesn't work, so you can tweak your programs. It's stakeholder focused. Has key questions, recommendations are based on the key questions, and you report to your stakeholders, all right? So the difference between quantitative and qualitative is here, and you can read, I'm a little theatrical, but I'm hitting stuff. What is this? I didn't want this anyway. But anyway, I'm sorry. So, quantitative focuses on numbers, numeric values, who, what, where, when. They match with outcomes about knowledge and comprehension, allows for measurement of variables, uses statistical data analysis, and generalize the greater population with larger samples, and is easily replicated. So we're talking about qualitative, right? Thinking about my experiences in the Mississippi Delta, you focus on text, narrative from respondents. I needed to talk to people to understand what was going on here, right? Why and how are the questions that are answered with qualitative research. Why, understanding the why. Match with outcomes, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluate, but that's all you. So it's, the researcher or the evaluator is really the instrument, right? Because you're the one gathering the information, analyzing the information, synthesizing the information, trying to find common themes. And it has the ability to capture elusive evidence of student learning and development, right? So that's the case for qualitative, and I know Sandra here? Sandra and Susan. Susan, oh yes, Lou. She's around. Susan, you want to just give up. Susan does qualitative research, and you I told people I was going to call her and do audience presentation, but go ahead.
Really, I can be heard in an 18-lane bowling alley. Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much covered it right there, but it's learning from stories. It's learning the entire context of a student's experience and how their personal experiences and their beliefs and perceptions have intersected with the system that they're embedded in. It gives a voice. Part of the reason we do qualitative research is because it gives the voice to the outliers. It allows you to have a window into their experience, which statistics is specifically designed to eliminate and ignore. Yay! And so we seek to give voices to the marginalized students.
Well said. That was like, what you did? All right. That's the case for qualitative. Objective number 1. Please consider qualitative. Like, all right. So she just said all of that. Right? Yeah. All right. All right, so what are qualitative data methods? So generally these are the most popular. You're going to find documents, all right? You're going to look at those documents as I did. Why aren't people of color going to college at high rates out of this particular region? Because their counselor thinks they should do brick masonry. But you weren't going to get that on the sheet of paper with the data. You were just going to get the numbers, the low numbers of students not going, right? Interviews and observations and focus groups. And I have two other people. I got Sandra. Sandra, you want to make the case for interviews or focus groups or observations? And I got my colleague doing qualitative research.
So I want to make a case for everything.
Okay, there you go.
Because they're also good. So like Melvin was talking about, and you were talking about telling your story and understanding the context and content. So that can come out gathering people's stories, their narratives from interviews, of course, but also focus groups. It's just larger interviews with more people. And an evaluation doing the focus groups and the interviews on the front end to understand as best as you can the context and content is very important. Observations are not just beyond just watching what people are doing, but participant observation and being involved. And then document analysis, that's the stuff, the pictures, the music, the foods, all kinds of things, not just paper things, but things that tell the story of the people. Mm-hmm. And it kind of made me think of your talk a little bit this morning, David, as well, gathering people's stories. Yeah. And then I have to tell one little story because it kind of relates to yours. My high school guidance counselor said, "You've been dating a fella for a couple of years. Why are you thinking about college? Aren't you going to get married?"
Oh.
True story.
Wow, wow, wow. So in my dissertation, I actually used all of these. So I, of course, looked at the documents. I did focus groups on college aspirants who were 12th graders, college enrolled folks, and asked them how they got there. Then out of college people who could have gone to college and asked them why they didn't go. And then I talked to their parents. You know, I already knew half their story. But anyway, and I had a few interviews as well. So this is talking about the interviews. So Sandra said that, and focus groups, we talked about that, and observation. All right, so when you're doing all these things, you're testing, you're observing, you're theorizing, right? You're looking at, drawing conclusions. I wonder, what is this saying? So, great, I have a group activity, and I really love that you all were like doing this stuff the last session, so you're going to do that again. So I'm going to do my Army voice and say, I'm going to expect you to participate. I hope this works. I saw it working in my mind. I said that a couple of times in my other group. So, this is called Don't Miss the Train. Let's see. Thank you. Okay, so why don't you give that to all of those folks over there. And I don't know if that's going to work. I think it's going to work. Okay. Yeah, you give that to this. And I don't know how this is going to work. Oh my God, this just might not work. Okay. So just give that to everybody. Yeah. All right. And what do I got? Okay. All right. You go. You give this to folks over here. And when you get your paper, I made up a verb. I want you to marinate on it. All right. Meditate, marinate, and everybody can participate. So don't say anything. All right. I just needed to hand out the paper. I should have handed them out as you came into the room, but anyway, got thrown out. All right, so this is going to require standing up and all of that kind of stuff. So marinate on the scenario. Marinate on the scenario. Marinate on the scenario. Another minute of marination. They told me if you go to Harvard, you can make up words. So I was like, what? All right. Don't miss the track. Does everybody have something? Everybody has something? You want to play Joffrey? No? Joffrey's my nephew. He goes to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I called him, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be here, and he came. And he's not going to miss class because he has classes, but anyway, I don't know. You don't have to play. Yeah. I just wanted to introduce you. Yeah. San Francisco. All right. San Francisco. All right, that's good. San Francisco. Okay, so there are 4 different scenarios. So what I want you to do is you're just going to have to mingle, right? So you have your scenario and you have instructions in bold, and I want you to just understand. I meant to say you're about to get best performing actor or actress. So just act. If you don't know, just act and make up some stuff. Right? But we have 4 different scenarios. There's an NSF funder, I think there's an alliance leader, there's a PI or a grantee or a provost, and there are principals. All right, in this whole room, and each of you have instructions, and this is where I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to ask you to stand up and act on the instructions as best as you can. Now, you're going to have to find people. You kind of know where some are, but you're going to have to act on the instructions as best you can, and you can yell out for clarification, but act on instructions as best as you can. Yes. What? No. Yeah. President. Yeah, you're supposed to find folks. Okay. The group should look like NSF funder, alliance leader, provost, and 2 principals. So do your best to get in that format. NSF, alliance leader, provost, and 2 principals. Okay, so the scenarios are, and you can kind of huddle or whatever, because you're going to have to look at the screen. So you got a little scenario. I'll let one group talk about what I think y'all said. You think you know what's going on or what? So what do you think? What do you think? Here's a microphone.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
So I guess in this exercise we tracked down the 4 people we needed to find. I was a principal. I was with another principal, and then we found the provost, the dear provost. And then we found our regional alliance funder. I don't know what your regional alliance leader.
Yeah, leader.
And we talked to the provost. We had this data that in our local district, our kids weren't showing up for their tests, and there's some idea that maybe they're eating some bad fruit, but gosh, we don't really know what's going on. And had to talk to the provost, and he's like, well, the data is complex. We don't understand it. I need you to go back out and do some more research, and context matters.
Yay! Okay.
So we've formed an alliance to get all of the community members who need to be in place, and we've gone to our NSF funder and said, look, you've funded us before, but you know what? We forgot to take into account context.
Whoop,
So this time, fund us again, and we'll and we'll go back out, and we'll see. Is it the bad fruit?
That's great.
Is it something else?
All right. Great. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so everybody look at the screen because this is the observation. So make sure you can come look at the screen. So each group has decided to observe, right? All right, so here we go. I hope this is all right.
Chương tiếp lại à? Đây là ngon mấy buổi. Đang mấy vốn, ra mấy vốn.
So you've made an observation, right? You decide you had data, right? You had the documents, all right? And you've interviewed people. I think the provost had to interview the principals. The principals had already conducted a focus group, and from the focus group, they found out some incidental information, right? And then you're like, wait a minute, this still doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Now, so we needed an observation, right? We needed something else to help us make sense of something we couldn't make sense of. And that's it. So we can sit down now. That's my qualitative. So I'm gonna tell you what I told you. So it's not in San Francisco, but I mean it's in Thailand. So I don't even want to risk it. But anyway, it was called Don't Miss the Train, all right? So there are issues that you're going to grapple with in your programs, in your projects, right? And you're going to be scanning over data, over survey, or over things, right? And you're going to say, wait a minute, I don't understand what this could be, right? And you're going to need to understand that context matters and culture matters. And I said culture, so let's say you're a health inspector in the United States of America, right? But culture matters because you can't go tell those folks they're wrong, right? You can't do that. Are they wrong? They're not wrong to them, all right? Okay, so I told you what I was going to tell you, and I told you, and now I need to tell you what I told you. So I told you that you should consider qualitative methods because there are going to be some things that you're going to have to understand why. You're going to have to peel back some layers because the data is not going to offer that to you. And I told you that culture matters. Culture matters, of course, don't miss the train, because you could miss the train because of something cultural. You could miss the train, and train is an analogy now. So I don't want you, when you go back to your various projects, I don't want you to miss the train. So if there's one thing that sticks with you, you know that qualitative research and the methods or the qualitative evaluation will help you not to miss the train. All right? Because culture matters and context matters. Voila. That's it. I'm done. Is it 2 o'clock? All right. We're cool. Are there like questions and stuff? Oh, okay. I gotta stay for questions. Okay.
Okay. Questions? We know where that took place now. So.
I went to Thailand. You can eat fruit, but just not under a train. You can. You should see some of the comments under that YouTube thing. It's like, I think I'd like some oil with my apple. I think I'd like some. It's just like really. Just sin.
Yes.
Just sin.
Yeah.
Yay!
Very good.
Okay, yay, okay.
This was great. So I think I have sort of a general question and a more specific version of the question.
Okay, and I'm going to pull on my qualitative colleagues for answers as well.
So the general question is, what do you get when you just ask the students about the train? Like when you ask them about the market, how does their lens affect, like do you see the train, right? If you ask the students why they're not coming or why they're sick, do they tell you about the train? And sort of the analogy to what I'm thinking about in this context is one of the things I've been thinking about, there's probably lots of ways in which it applies, is talking about politics with the students that we're engaged with. So we run a lot of programs with students that are affected by the current political climate in a lot of really powerful ways, and what the role is for having those direct conversations with them, you know, talking about the role of science policy right now and funding for science and facts and, you know, like how do all of those things fit together in terms of understanding their lens versus our lens of the culture? Does that, it's a big question.
It is. I'm going to stay at the bottom part in terms of whether the students share information. I think there's, clearly it's voluntary, right? So you ask thought-provoking questions in interviews and focus groups. I think that people react differently when they're part of a group. So you may get some information just because it's group share and they're comfortable saying stuff because they're in a group. And then you could probably get some really, really, really specific information from an interview or one-on-one type of interview. And then, of course, observations, you just show up and like you can make sense or see that. The political lens and all of that, I'm not sure. Some of my colleagues and I were talking about, you know, the bias that we bring to the scenario as evaluators, and we have to be conscious of our biases, conscious of our own issues and what we bring. So, you know, outside of just some deliberate activity to ensure that the evaluators or the people asking the questions are as objective as possible, I'm not sure how to kind of deal with that, you know, political aspect and stuff. I think we make evaluators by virtue of the fact of their charge. I think impartiality is implied in that, or they shouldn't hire you. You know, I mean, I think it's implied in that. I don't know if Susan or Dave or, you know, Sandra. I'm sorry?
I work on a reservation for many years, and I find member checking to be the single most important thing to do with my qualitative data.
You want to say a little bit more about member checking so that everybody knows?
So in my own case, I do a lot of member checking because I work with people who have, for many, many generations, been oppressed, and evaluation, research, and education are three of the main tools used to oppress and assimilate American Indian people. Ethnography has a really ugly reputation, for example, so they come in, they gather qualitative data, they make judgments, and they put the information out there. Many times ethnographers have misinterpreted what they have observed or been told. So that's one reason to member check. The other reason is intellectual property rights and cultural sensitivity. You might get information that tribal elders, for example, will share with you that isn't meant to go any further than you. And that's particularly important in publishing. You have to member check. That information may not be appropriate to be put in the public eye.
Thank you.
Hi, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. Just a little something I threw together. I just- literally.
I have my context is a 2-year college classroom, and I teach about 24 students, and I get them all over the spectrum in terms of ability. I have some really, really good students, and I have some students who have never gone through calculus but still can't pass my physics class, right? And so, and they talk to me a lot, especially when they're in trouble. They come in and talk to me. I have a lot of one-on-ones. But the struggle I have is how do I look at them through the same lens, as in try to be unbiased in my evaluation of them in the course, that level. At the same time, account for some of their backgrounds that they've shared with me. I mean, if a student comes in, and this is especially true for being inclusive, right? If a student comes to me, and this has happened, and they say, oh, you know, I couldn't come to class because I had to take my little brother to school, or babysit my baby sister.
Right.
I mean, those are things beyond my control and their control, and yet they weren't in class and they're doing badly.
Right.
So how do you balance the two of them?
I could tell you about me when I taught algebra, college algebra. I hold the standard. So if you're a professor, then you're both the disseminator of knowledge, but you're also the gatekeeper in a sense, right? And so you don't want to put your name on, endorse anything that is substandard, right? So I'll just tell you about me. So I taught college algebra, and I had a lady who had 3 kids and all of this stuff, and she would miss class occasionally and all that. And I always do my midterm, right before midterm, and you can add and drop, you know, all that kind of stuff. I always do this speech. I say something like, oh, and I had baseball players who missed games and basketball players and all of that. And so people were failing. And I said, I don't care how many touchdowns you make, how many basketballs you shoot, or how high your skirt is when you're cheering for them. If you don't know anything about college algebra, you will not be passing this course. You just won't, right? And so for this lady she was like, well, I had to pick up my child, do the grades, and soccer practice and all this stuff. And I just simply said, I said, ma'am, I understand all that. I'm a parent, I get that. I said, but the truth is, no one held a gun to your head and told you to enroll in this class, right? So, and you're not getting a grade for life management. You're getting a grade for college algebra. You're going to have to demonstrate to me that you know college algebra. That's me. Now, you can do what you want. So they're going to have to demonstrate. You're going to have to hold the line. You're going to have to hold the standard. Whatever the standard is, they must meet the standard and deal with their stuff. That's just it. And we all have stuff to deal with, some more than others. But, you know, that's just it. Part of why I was ABD for 4 years was my wife and I, we had 2 kids in like 15 months apart, and I was the Army captain, and George W. Bush was at war with everybody, and it was just crazy. So my mother they gave her 4 months to live, but she lived 8 more years. But I had to deal with my mother, I had to deal with Army Reserve, I had to deal with 2 kids on the way, 2 kids on the tube, I had to deal with it. I was in the doctoral program. And I had a full-time job to pay for the wife and the 2 kids and the mortgage and all of that kind of stuff. And nobody said, oh my God, you're having a problem, managing life, we're going to give you an A. They didn't do that at Vanderbilt. Okay.
So we heard earlier about the idea of doing qualitative before quantitative to inform the quantitative. I was wondering, in your case, if you followed up any of the qualitative analysis that you did with sort of a different quantitative approach.
Yeah, so my train for the Mississippi Delta was, what came out was that the lack of educational legacy, so to speak, in the household, so mothers and fathers had not completed high school for, let alone college. But also, there was something that came up in my research called zones of production. And that was new for me. But basically there are regions that are known for producing certain things. In the Mississippi Delta, it was cotton, and it became catfish, right? So in that region, that's what you do. And that's what you get groomed to do. And in my mother's case, in my grandparents' case, that's why you have 14 children. Because you have 14 children to take care of the land so you can have mass level service, to cultivate, stuff. And so that was the economy, and that's what people were groomed to do in this zone of production. In the lower, like Florida, West Palm Beach areas and where they grow citrus stuff, so those who are not rich are groomed to be fruit harvesters and all that. And California, you have the grapes and the wine. And I found that out because I was looking at the Mississippi Delta, and I found different other zones of production. West Virginia coal mines. So if you are born in this area and you're born in this household, in this region that is known for doing this, then that is what you're going to do. And your own talent, skills, and abilities in college and your aspirations and all that kind of stuff come second to what we are created to do in this region. So that was my training. My training was a cultural, it was a cultural zone of production that just was, And I learned this, somebody said, here's something good, like we all have strategies, but I'm sure you've heard, culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture eats strategy for lunch. You can have the best strategy in the world. I can go to the Mississippi Delta and say I'll take 50 kids around the country and take them to schools and stuff like that, and they'll end up going to Yale and Fisk and da-da-da. But culture ate my strategy.
Hi, my name is Naomi Waite, and I'm an associate professor of science education. I think it's more of a comment in terms of thinking about how we are, in fact, representing populations of color. And I think it's very important for us, and not to take anything away from the speaker's experiences, but I think it's very important to ensure that our narrative is not one of deficiency. Particularly because we might be from a specific region or we might have specific experiences, but we must also consider that there are existing institutional and cultural barriers that do in fact prevent certain students from pursuing certain experiences, and particularly in terms of STEM. I think it's in that regard, I think we must be very aware of, for instance, pedagogical approaches, assessment approaches in terms of how we are making sense of students' representations of their learning and understanding. And for instance, giving them experiences to understand what college is and what are the different kinds of experiences that they can have. There's also ways to do that so that it is in fact meaningful. And I think, like you mentioned, just doing it does not necessarily convey that that will be helpful, but just like how we teach is important, the kinds of experiences that we provide and the ways in which we do so is also important. So I just wanted to make sure that we don't leave here with the perpetuation of narratives of deficiency, but rather narratives of opportunity, because that is where sort of the line is drawn in terms of who gets into STEM and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. No?
I wanted to offer a comment that piggybacks on what was just said. Holding to standards is, in my mind, a given. We do not want to produce students who can't succeed or excel at the next level. But one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, knowing the kinds of binds the students get into, how might we anticipate those binds and structure our educational experience accordingly? And also recognizing that the culture of the institution And the culture of the discipline may be such that students are not likely to produce the kind of work that we want. How do we build in a structural sense, ways to facilitate students meeting our expectations when we know that that may potentially be an issue? So I'll just give you one example to think about. I teach in a master's program with many returning adults, and I was classically trained at the University of Illinois, where if you had to read 2 books between this Tuesday night class and next Tuesday night, that's what you did. I require about 2,000 pages of reading in my 3-hour course, and students not only balk at that, but they write me and say, do you realize that I work and that I do this and that I do that? Well, I thought for a couple of years about what options I had to not let go of my standards, but to also make my classroom a place where students in this program felt that they could achieve. So the strategy I came up with is you can earn 50% of the points in my course without evaluation of the quality of your work, just by doing the work. And the other 50% of the grade comes on things that I grade using my same University of Illinois standard in a narrative response to the students. So they've already got a cushion, and I take their papers and drop them into a template where I can say, this sentence doesn't make any sense. And I can grade them, not what they might call harshly, but I can grade them earnestly, because I know that the points that I deduct are not going to cause them to fail the course. They get honest feedback. They can, if they choose to, use that and rise to the occasion next time. So I give that as an example of, think about ways you can structure the educational environment so that there aren't fixed deadlines, there aren't hard things that students run into, but you can still expect and hold the same kind of standards in terms of how they exit the program.